Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever been close to someone struggling with addiction or maybe even navigated that incredibly complex path yourself, you know firsthand just how chaotic and overwhelming the whole thing can feel. Honestly, it often seems like a storm with no beginning and absolutely no end. But what if we could actually map that storm? What if we could chart the exact progression of addiction and, more importantly, the structured path out of it? Well, today, we're demystifying the addiction recovery process. We're going to be using some really profound insights from retired clinical psychologist Lane Lassiter. We're going to take an empathetic but highly structured look at how addiction forms, how it takes hold, and the definitive steps required to finally break free. Let's dive in.
Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the universality of addiction, move into its roots, look at facing current reality issues, explore the turning point, and finally, wrap up with the stages of recovery.
Section 1, the universality of addiction and who it actually affects. Right out of the gate, we need to acknowledge that addiction touches almost everyone's life in some way, shape, or form. To really humanize the clinical data we're about to explore, let's take a look at this quote from our source author, Lane Lassiter. Now, he's a retired clinical psychologist, but he isn't just speaking to us from a textbook. He says, "I had to face and learn to recover from alcoholism, cigarette smoking, and food addiction." I love this because he's establishing his credibility not just from decades of professional practice, but from lived, gritty experience. He has literally walked this road himself.
And that brings us to why this explainer matters so deeply to you. Even if you aren't personally struggling with addictive behaviors right now, just think about the people around you for a second. We're talking about parents, spouses, children, friends, colleagues. Statistically speaking, it's highly likely you're going to encounter someone in your inner circle who faces the massive challenge of recovery. Understanding the framework we're about to cover, it's a real game changer. It equips you to actually understand what the people in your life are going through, moving us away from judgment and toward profound comprehension.
So let's look at the overarching framework we're exploring today. Lassiter has charted this out chronologically. If we start all the way at the beginning, we have what he calls frequent background issues, things like childhood adjustments and survival behavioral strategies. From there, it bleeds into enduring self-adjustments, like depression and anxiety. This is so powerful because it shows us that addiction doesn't just pop out of thin air, right? It's a compounding sequence of events and emotional states that build up over years before they ever manifest as what we see on the surface.
Moving forward in time, we shift from the past into the present and the future. We hit current reality issues. These are the actual, tangible problems the addiction is causing today. But then, we hit that crucial turning point, the decision to connect with helping resources. And finally, we reach the structured stages and goals of the recovery process itself. This entire map takes us all the way from childhood trauma to a hopeful, rehabilitated future. So let's break this whole thing down piece by piece.
Section 2, the roots of addiction, and where it actually originates. Because to truly destigmatize addictive behaviors, we have to rewind the clock.
Addiction is fundamentally a timeline. It's a cause and effect journey. Years past bring those background issues we mentioned. Those bleed into years of adjustment, which inevitably cause present-day reality issues. Eventually, that forces a day of change, which finally opens the door to future recovery goals. By visualizing it this way, we completely strip away the misconception that addiction is just some spontaneous moral failing. It absolutely isn't. It is a long-tail reaction spanning from past trauma all the way to future healing.
Let's look a bit closer at those early years. Lassiter points out that many people who become addicted grew up in troubled family or community environments. He actually refers to this as family trauma syndrome. And what happens in these environments is that basic human needs just get frustrated. A child experiences unresolved trauma, and as a direct result, they develop profound difficulties in trusting themselves and trusting others. Addiction often takes root right here, in these self-defeating coping strategies that are formed when a person was really just trying to survive their childhood. Now, as those children grow into adults, they develop what Lassiter calls enduring self-adjustments. We're talking about depression, anger, severe anxiety, massive self-worth issues, isolation, and sometimes an inability to even identify what they are feeling. Society loves to label these as character flaws, right? But what this explainer helps us understand is that these are actually survival behavioral strategies. These painful emotional states are understandable, albeit really harmful, armor that people put on to cope with the past trauma we just talked about. But eventually, that armor gets way too heavy.
Section 3, Facing Current Reality Issues. This is where we move into the present day to explain exactly what happens when those survival strategies stop working entirely.
Here we find the real tragic irony of addiction, perfectly summarized as a devastating feedback loop. As an addiction progresses, it completely curtails a person's ability to face and solve their current life challenges. So those old problems, they stay completely unchanged. But simultaneously, the addiction is generating a massive wave of brand new problems. You are fundamentally prevented from fixing the past, all while actively destroying the present. It's a really tough spot to be in.
Let's get specific about what that destruction actually looks like. As the cycle spins out of control, the consequences pile up rapidly. The individual starts neglecting their family and their job. They abandon a healthy lifestyle completely. They might engage in excessive spending, take massive legal risks, put themselves in unsafe situations, and inevitably begin lying to the very people trying to help them. For every cycle of addictive behavior, the person emerges with their previous reality totally unchanged, but now they're carrying the crushing weight of relationship breakdowns, vocational failure, and failing health. They become totally, literally trapped.
But there is a way out. Section 4, the turning point and interrupting the cycle. This is the critical moment of intervention.
A major takeaway from Lassater's work is how this turning point actually comes about. We often romanticize the idea of the voluntary decision, right? That movie moment of internal clarity where someone realizes they can't stop and they just ask for help. And sure, that does happen. But consider the alternative, involuntary decisions. Often, recovery begins because of outside blunt force ultimatums, a spouse threatening to leave, a boss confronting them at work, or sudden legal accountability like an arrest. The incredibly hopeful news here is that an involuntary start can actually be just as effective a catalyst for genuine recovery as a voluntary one, provided it leads to a real commitment.
And commitment really is the operative word here. Lassater notes, many people unfortunately endure repeated cycles of partial decision before they finally make a deeply rooted decision to do whatever it takes. This is such a profound distinction. A half-hearted attempt, a partial decision just to get a spouse off your back or satisfy a judge for the time being, usually leads to failure. Surviving the incredibly challenging stages of recovery requires a deeply rooted, unconditional decision to do whatever it takes to reclaim your life.
Once that deep decision is made, the real work begins. Section 5, Stages of the Recovery. Let's look at the actual path forward.
Lassater outlines 6 distinct, incredibly powerful goals. First, you must ally with helping resources. You simply cannot do this alone. Second, you have to understand the logic of your past behavior in its historical context. You have to realize exactly why you built those survival strategies in the first place. Third, with professional help, you resolve those painful emotional states from childhood. Fourth, you actively develop new, effective strategies for meeting your personal needs, basically replacing the addiction with healthy coping mechanisms. Fifth, you act on new life possibilities and genuinely plan for future fulfillment. And finally, step 6, you share your experience, your strength, and your hope with others as an affirmation of your own recovery. You essentially turn your deepest pain into a beacon for someone else.
So as we wrap up this explainer today, I really want to leave you with this question. Who in your life faces the challenge of recovery? And how will you understand their journey today? We've seen that addiction isn't some random failing. It's a complex, chronological journey from unresolved trauma to desperate coping mechanisms. By understanding this roadmap, you are now empowered to be genuinely helpful, incredibly empathetic, and a true ally rather than just an enabler. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep seeking understanding, and I'll see you next time.